hanno detto, ah vabbè, se avevo risposto anche Randello è facilissimo capirlo, però effettivamente perché si sono fatti corsi sui corsi di italiano e poi arrivano.
Dai, ma il programma di lingua umana non è paragonabile a niente. Poi nell'università pubblica c'è proprio, non c'è investimento sulle lingue, quindi dicevo oggi che l'anno scorso, cioè noi abbiamo un problema di deficit del I'm going to hide behind the banner.
Are we good to go? Are you ready? Okay. Good evening. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Italian Research Seminar. This is a core event of the Center for Italian Studies and co-sponsored by the Medieval Institute. Since 2011, the seminar has offered a regular forum for faculty, postdoctoral scholars, and graduate students to share and discuss their current research on Italy. It continues to serve as one of the center's most important spaces for interdisciplinary exchange and intellectual community at Notre Dame. This evening, we're especially delighted to welcome Professor Filippo Gianferrari, Associate Professor of Literature at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and a graduate of Notre Dame's PhD program and MA in Italian. Before joining UC Santa Cruz, Filippo taught at Vassar College and Smith College, and his research examines the intersections of education, theology, and politics in Dante and late medieval Italy. His 2024 Oxford University Press book, Dante's Education, Latin School Books, and Vernacular, explores how Dante transformed the moral culture of the Latin classroom into a vernacular poetics of learning, an intellectual history that redefines the connection between schooling, poetry, and civic life. His next project, Political Eschatology, which we'll hear more about today, Vernacular Theories of the Common Good, examines the interplay of late medieval political theory and theological debates on the body-soul relationship, the intellect, and the beatific vision. Filippo hosted the web seminar series Project Paradiso and is co-editor with Ronald Hertzman of the forthcoming volume, Dante's Paradiso, A Reader's Guide, Routledge 2025. In tonight's lecture, Filippo revisit one of the Commedia's most memorable moments, Dante's encounter with the musician Casella in Purgatorio 2, and he'll explore Dante's broader meditation on memory, embodiment, and empathy. Please join me in warmly welcoming Filippo Gianferrari.
So there is a handout. I'll have the quotations there. I apologize for some typos that I found after I asked to print it. So thank you very much for that generous introduction, and thank you for being here this afternoon and for inviting me to share my work. Finally, a heartfelt thank you to Italian Studies and the Devers family for allowing me this past summer to carry out in this amazing library part of the research that I'm about to present. Hopefully you won't regret it. We'll see. Before I begin, let me ask you a question. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to meet a ghost? Not just any ghost, but the ghost of an old friend. We're actually quite comfortable with this idea, thanks to countless ghost stories. Think of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, that wonderful moment when Scrooge meets Marley's ghost, and his first question is delightfully practical. Can you sit down? Scrooge is worried about whether a transparent ghost can actually take a chair, and whether refusing might lead to, quote, an embarrassing explanation. The ghost, of course, sits down, and as if he were quite used to it, Dickens tells us.
We don't usually approach Dante's Commedia as a comic ghost story, but today I want to suggest that Dante shares the same human curiosity about spectral existence. In Purgatorio, the ways the separated soul exist and experience in their interim state take center stage. And like Scrooge, Dante has practical question when he meets his first familiar soul in Purgatory, his friend Casella. The sense of maraviglia, this is the word that Dante used, that Dante and the souls express so many times in these first cantos has been partly lost on modern readers, I believe, for lack of familiarity with the heathen philosophical and theological debates on sensation and cognition in the separated soul that inform the poem's cultural background. Today I want to propose that the profound philosophical implication of what I call the Casella paradox become apparent when we read this episode through the lens of the medieval reception of Aristotle's De Anima and the resulting debates about the relationship between body and soul and what defined the human mind. What emerges from Dante's engagement with this urgent matter, I'll argue, is a coherent political anthropology in which memory and imagination, fantastic, this is the wrong page, in which memory and imagination are at the core of the individual and collective identity. This talk is divided in three parts and a conclusion, or rather a coda. The first two trace the evolution of memory in Purgatorio between Dante's encounters with two friends, Casella and Forese. The third section looks at how memory and imagination are instrumental to Dante's vision of Purgatorio as a place where affective and political communities are restored, redeemed, and renewed. In my coda, I will very briefly open my discussion to the beyond Purgatorio perspective. All right. Scholars have obsessed over identifying the targets of Cato's rebuke at the end of Purgatorio 2. Was it just singing and having fun instead of getting on with the journey to God? Or was it also the philosophical content of Dante's song, the problem? Was it music or philosophy that was out of place? I believe that our obsession with this question has blinded us to a more striking reality that Dante places in our way before Cato's rebuke. Let me take you back to this familiar scene. Dante has just arrived in Purgatory, and the very first soul he meets, after Cato the guardian, is an old friend named Casella, a Florentine singer who had died earlier that year. Casella, conveniently just at that moment, is disembarking from the Purgatorial ferry. Here is the first odd thing. Casella should not still be there. He had died several months before. For reasons never explained in the text, he was denied passage several times. Only after the start of the Jubilee year, 3 months earlier, had he finally been granted passage. There are many possible explanations. There is a Virgilian echo. Professor Ketchy has more to say about that. But in my opinion, a likely explanation for the delay is poetic necessity. Dante needed a friend, and specifically one with a beautiful voice. Casella recognizes Dante and springs forward to embrace him. 3 times, Dante tries to hug him, only to discover the impalpability of this ombra. It's an echo, again, of Virgil's Aeneid, where Aeneas fails to embrace his father, Anchises' soul. Readers have made much of this failed embrace, but I don't think that this is where Dante wanted us to focus, as he doesn't stop at this Virgilian echo. The following exchange with Casella, I argue, engages directly with the technical question, debated within the scholastic environment of the 13th century, that Virgil's archetype simply could not contemplate. Casella is quick to reassure Dante. Così com'io t'amai nel mortal corpo, così t'amo sciolta. The absence of the body has neither diminished nor increased his affection for the old friend. Then comes Dante's most consequential question. Does Casella remember love songs? And crucially, can he sing it? Or does a new law prevent him from doing so? Without answering, Casella begins singing the first of Dante's canzoni, Amor, nella mente, ragiona. Dante tells us that he began so sweetly that the sweetness still sounds within him as he records this event in his poem. Most modern readers interpret Dante's question about a new law in purely legal terms. Maybe the rules of purgatory forbid souls from singing. Yet the verb togliere modifies both memoria and uso. While a legal norm might forbid singing love songs in purgatory, it makes little sense to apply the same disciplinary prohibition to one's ability to remember them. Remembering might simply be physically impossible for a disembodied soul, as it could be the use of the voice. What if Dante's question is first and foremost practical? Like Scrooge, wondering if a ghost can sit in a chair. Dante is wondering, can a disembodied soul actually sing? The early commentator Benvenuto understood this, and I'm quoting, he speaks conditionally, and he means Dante, because he did not know whether this man, who had lost through death the organs by which the voice is formed, could still sing. And another early commentator, the Anonimo Fiorentino, more comprehensively point out that the question extends to memory as well. It is the opinion of the philosophers that when souls depart from the body, the wills and desire they had while living, as well as their knowledge, are at once separated from the soul when it leaves the body. Whereas the theologians hold that such knowledge in some part remains within the soul. To confirm the anonymous intuition, one should note that the term memoria is used here for the first time in the poem to discuss what the soul remembers in its current disembodied state. Dante's focus on memory as a bridge between life and death is also revealed by its operating across diegetic and extra-diegetic levels. Casella remembers Dante's song, and Dante the poet remembers the sweetness of Casella's singing. Let me explain why this matters at all. The controversy around the survival of memory in the disembodied soul had divided 13th century philosophers and theologians following the Latin reception of the fifth book of Avicenna's Al-Shifa on the soul, often referred to as Avicenna's De Anima. The debate continued into the 14th century in countless scholastic commentaries and questions that engage more or less explicitly with Averroes' long commentary on Aristotle's De Anima. Here is the problem with memory in the separated soul. According to Aristotle's view, which were shared by his Arabic interpreters and many Latin ones, for Aristotle, neither knowledge nor memory can happen without a body. As he writes in his De Anima, when one contemplates, one must at the same time contemplate an appearance, an image. For appearances are like perceptions, except that they are without matter. Unquote. All our intellectual activities begin with appearances of perceived object that the faculty of imagination abstracts from the senses and stores in the mind. The imagination produces what we call the phantasm, a mental image that lasts even in the absence of the perceived object. From the phantasmata, we abstract universal intelligibles and species, thanks to the combined activity of what Aristotle called the active and the possible intellects. Later Christian helomorphism followed the same principle. As Thomas Aquinas explained, it is natural for humans to come to intelligible things through sensible things, because all our cognition begins from the senses. Sensible forms are apprehended through temporarily indexed phantasms, also known as intentions. But here is the critical question Aristotle admits is an insoluble problem. In which part of the soul do the phantasms have their proper dwelling? Is it in the soul or in the body? Or does it belong to the composite of both? Whichever answer one picked had massive implications for the doctrine of the soul's afterlife destiny. For theologians, this created a crisis. They simply could not allow for memory to be erased after death, not even provisionally. How would individual identity continue? How would souls in hell and purgatory remember the sins they are being punished or purged for? The biblical text suggested otherwise, as in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke's gospel, which was often quoted as authoritative. Souls in the afterlife clearly have memory of their past lives. and can recognize each other. Hence, for Augustine, memory coincides with the mens, the rational soul, which is immortal. Yet, tensions between philosophical and theological demands appears everywhere in scholastic literature. Aquinas, for instance, identifies the imaginative, cogitative faculty with Aristotle's passible or passive intellect, which receives affections from material realities and must be part of the sensitive soul. This identification has momentous implication, as he explains in his commentary on Aristotle's De Anima. And here I'm quoting Aquinas. We do not remember after death the things we knew in life, because this part of the intellective soul, that is, the rational, is unaffectable. That is, why it is not the subject of the soul's affections, such as love, hate, remembering, and the like. Passive intellect, on the other hand, is perishable, because it pertains to the sensory part. Without this perishable part of the soul, however, our intellect cognizes nothing, because it does not cognize anything without a phantasm. And so when the body is destroyed, the knowledge of things does not remain in the separated soul in the same way in which it now intellectually cognizes. And here Aquinas is saying what Aristotle says. In his commentary on Peter Lombard's sentences, he further elaborates that there are two types of memory. One is the power of the sensitive part that concerns past time, and this will not exist in the separated soul. The other is a part of the imagination, belonging to the intellective part, which abstracts from every difference of time and can remember in the afterlife. But this intellectual memory seems to remember the condition of past rather than the past itself, and the notion of memory as the faculty retaining things. Hence, in light of Aristotle's psychology, while deprived by death of its body, the separated soul should have no imagination and thus neither memory of the things it knew and experienced, nor any lingering love for them. But thinking and loving or hating are not affections of that intellect, but of this composite that has it, insofar as it has it. Composite meaning soul and body. For this reason, when this composite is destroyed, the intellect neither remembers nor loves, for they were not activities of that intellect, but rather were activities of the sheer composite, which has perished. But the intellect is no doubt something more divine and impassible. So here's the paradox. Casella's first words to Dante in Purgatorio clearly defy this Aristotelian and scholastic principle. Not only does Casella remember and love his old friend in the same affective way in which we know when embodied, but he can also sing with the sweetest voice. This is an exceptional feat. According to Aristotle's De Anima, singing requires the ability to move air through a windpipe and produce sounds. And as we'll learn later in Purgatorio 25, this is possible because as soon as it separates from the body, the soul organa. It creates organs, including, we can assume, phonatory ones. In this exchange with Casella, therefore, Dante signals his engagement, I believe, with the scholastic debate on the nature of the separated soul's cognitive powers, while suggesting his allegiance to theological belief in the survival of memory after death. As we continue reading the following cantos of Ante-Purgatory, Dante insistently focused on the wondrous reality revealed by the contrast between his own body and the disembodied souls. But here's what is truly remarkable, in my opinion. It's not the substantial difference between Dante and the souls that matters the most, as this narrative would seem to foreground, but their phenomenological identity. Though they exist differently, they experience and express themselves in very much the same way. This paradox is already hinted at in Purgatorio 2. When the souls discover Dante's living body, they become pale, a change of physical appearance that would require the presence of blood. The soul's discoloring mirrors Dante's own discoloring, or reaction rather, shortly after, when testing the impalpability of Casella's body. Both the living Dante and the dead spirits can change their external features to reveal their internal emotions. What unites them, in other words, is greater than what sets them apart. So much so that they both get so engrossed in something that captures their attention that they forget everything else. First, the spirits are so mesmerized by Dante's bodily presence that become oblivious to their chief task. Then together, they are all so enraptured by Casella's song, as if nothing else touched their minds, that they don't perceive Cato approaching until he starts yelling at them. For modern readers like us who grew up on ghost stories, spirits who look and act like real people have little that's novel. But what about spirits who get distracted like us? Now, that's new, I think, and I argue would have appeared remarkable in the context of Dante's contemporary scholastic inquiries into cognition in the separated soul. For someone deeply committed to humans' helomorphic nature, when separated from the sense organs, the mind should be unable to abstract the phantasms by which it knows and remembers. So how would souls know and remember anything without the aid of the phantasmata? Thomas argues that they do so by divine infusion of universal forms. They know through influence from higher substances, namely God and the angels. Although this provides greater knowledge than humans can ever achieve in life, the soul has only a confused understanding when it operates as a separated soul without the body's mediation. Thus, knowing by divine form infusion is a more imperfect mode of understanding, as scholars like Stephen Ogden and Therese Corey have noticed. Stephen Ogden suitably uses this sentence, that when we are separated from our body, according to Aquinas, we are on intellectual life support from God. But souls that know everything through divine infusion shouldn't get distracted like Casella and friends in Purgatorio 2, as they wouldn't experience and know singulars directly through their senses. They wouldn't have the same cognitive limitation as the living. The issues Dante sets up in these cantos he solves, as we know, much later in Purgatorio 25, where Statius explains that disembodied souls aren't technically material, they have an aerial body. Virgil foreshadows this reality in Purgatorio 3 when he calls the disembodied souls simili corpi, and points to the mystery of divine providence that allows them to experience torments, heat, and cold. It is thanks to this vicarious body that souls can retain their affective memory as well, which, as we shall presently see, has a central function in Purgatorio. Are you with me? This was the heaviest part, I think. Near the end of Dante's purgatorial journey, on the terrace of the Gluttons, he meets another friend, Forese Donato. The two encounters between Forese and Dante and between Casella and Dante are rarely read together, but their parallels are obvious and call for a closer look. First, the vision of emaciated gluttons renews Dante's wonder at the shadow's exceptional similarity to real bodies, which is once again mirrored by the soul's amazement at his living body, a dynamic that brings us back to Ante-Purgatory. Second, Forese mentioned the paradoxical ability of souls' faces to change skin color, which, as we know, was first mentioned in Purgatorio 2. Third, neither Casella nor Forese should technically be where Dante meets them. Casella is late, Forese is early. He has made remarkable progress thanks to his wife's prayers. Fourth, the meeting with Forese is accompanied by the recollection of another of Dante's past poetic achievement, a canzone, between the two friends, and closes on another canzone mentioned by Buonaggiunta da Lucca, Donna che avete intelletto d'amore, an obvious parallel to Casella's singing of Amor nella mente ragiona. Fifth, voice again plays a central role, since Forese's face is altered beyond recognition by the extreme emaciation. It's only through his voice that Dante can identify him. Six, as Dante, Virgil, and Statius leave the gluttons behind, they experience the same cognitive disconnection of the souls reproached by Cato at the end of Purgatorio 2. They are suddenly startled by the guardian angel while completely lost in their thoughts. And Dante compares them to feeding animals suddenly startled, as with the simile of the feeding doves that describe the soul scattered by Cato in Purgatorio 2. 7, and more crucially, memory is central again. Dante recollects the shameful life full of vices he shared with Forese. Se tu riduci a mente qual qual fosti meco e qual io teco fui, ancor più grave il memorar presente. As Casella expresses in death the same affection to Dante he had while living, Dante expresses the longevity of his feelings for Forese. But here we come to the most consequential difference between the two reunions with Dante's dead friends. Dante's memory of his past life with Forese brings him sorrow and shame, rather than whatever feelings he had felt at the time, while Forese appears entirely unperturbed and neither expresses melancholy nor regret at the memory of their past sinful life. As the space between Dante's two encounters with Casella and Forese spans almost the whole of Purgatory, their difference marks a major transformation in the soul's emotional response to their memories. Let me bring in Augustine's famous meditation on memory from Book 10 of the Confessions to define the process that I think takes place. Augustine compares memory to the stomach of the mind. Recollection across time is like digestion. The same memory, I'm quoting, contains also the affections of my mind, not in the same manner that my mind itself contains them when it feels them, but far otherwise, according to a power of its own. For without rejoicing, I remember myself to have joy, and without sorrow do I recollect my past sorrow. The memory then is, as it were, the belly of the mind, and joy and sadness like sweet and bitter food, which when committed to the memory are, as it were, passed into the belly, where they may be stowed, but cannot taste. Dante's exchange with Forese about their past perfectly exemplifies this process of affective digestion that memory allows, as they no longer have the same judgment or feelings about the past. Whereas Casella recalls his past affection for his friend and still feels them at present, and even stops to share a moment of leisure and reciprocal enjoyment, drawing Cato's rebuke, Forese expresses desire to be with his friend in eternal life rather than the present. When will I see you again? How long before I shall see you again? But he's pulled on by a stronger desire, one Casella clearly doesn't yet experience. Now you remain behind, for time is costly. Here in this kingdom I should lose too much by moving with you thus at equal pace. Casella, who lives everything as if still present, still getting stuck and distracted. Not only is Forese unmoved by the same affections associated with past events, but he's capable of recalling affection while experiencing opposite emotions. The difference with Francesca in Inferno 5 is also notable. At the heart of Forese's speech is the paradoxical subversion of affections the soul experiences in purgatory. Suffering is turned into joy. He corrects himself when recalling this experience. I speak of pain, but I should speak of solace. And he also speaks of the sweet wormwood of torment, which clearly replaces la dolcezza of Casella's song. Augustine explained this paradox. Memory contains images of different perturbations, but I can talk of sorrow while being joyful. According to Forese's earthly memory, what souls experience in purgatory should correctly be termed pena. In light of his new existence and understanding, however, he can only call it solazzo, pleasure. Is it a mere coincidence, I wonder, that Augustine's concept of memory as the belly of the mind, venter animi, should be evoked in Purgatorio precisely in conjunction with gluttony, the sin where digestion is so obviously symbolized? The association should not be too surprising, as this was a well-known idea, also popularized by medieval educational treatises such as Hugo's St. Victor Didascalicon, where Hugo refers to the venter memoria. The cantos of gluttony, it should be noted, collapse different temporalities in one present, as remarked by Bonaggiunta's 3-time repetition of the verb I see, to talk about past, present, and future. To quote Augustine again, the present of things past is memory. The present of things present is sight. The present of things future is expectation. In these cantos, memory emerges as the Augustinian anthropological mediator, to quote Kevin Grove's definition, between body and soul, knowledge and divine wisdom, time and eternity. Memory gives unity to the human person, as well as to the Christian community, as I like now to show. Last section. Almost there. So now we come to the heart of my argument. The question Dante poses to Virgil in Purgatorio 25, which Virgil defers to Statius, is potentially deceiving in its apparent redundancy. Dante asks how disembodied spirit, with no need for food, can grow thin. But technically, Forese had already answered this question 2 cantos earlier. Celestial virtue, through the sense of smell, makes this unnatural process possible. The soul's hunger and thirst are caused by the smell del pomo e dello sprazzo. But the fact that these desires make them thinner can only be explained by divine intervention. In Purgatorio 25, I believe, Dante wishes to clarify how and why we still function as humans and as a community in Purgatory. Because embodiment and community are the 2 cornerstones of his still novistic poetics, with its focus on intellectual power of sensation and imagination, and of his political anthropology. His solution, as it has been argued, is close to the one proposed by the pseudo-Augustinian De Spiritu et Anima, for which the rational soul takes with it imagination, reason, and intellect, all senses. The aim of Dante's aerial body, I contend, is primarily to explain how the soul can continue to know through a cognitive process that is still centered on the faculty of imagination. How could these souls otherwise learn from the exemplary program at the heart of Purgatorio reformation? All these examples, as Dante experiences them, are sensible. They are visual, oral, mental, and they are tailored to the soul's perceptions, which are impeded by different torments. The Purgatorio program is built for humans to experience through the senses by means of apprehension, intention, and cogitation, to echo some of the key terms in Virgil's lecture in Purgatorio 18. The importance of this fact becomes clear, I believe, when we consider that in one of Purgatorio's 3 central cantos, at the very center of the poem, Dante evokes the power of imagination to account for his mental vision of the examples of punished wrath. O immaginativa che ne rube, talvolta si di fuor, com non s'accorge, perché d'intorno suoni in 1000 tube. Chi muove te, se il senso non ti porge? Muoveti lume che nel ciel si informa, per sé o per voler che giù lo scorge. Imagination or fantasy is one of the internal senses. It abstracts, receives, and retains the sensitive forms, the phantasmata, from the sense experience of external objects. Or, as in this case, sometimes it contemplates within itself images that come from either the natural influence of the celestial spheres or divine inspiration through angelic mediation. It also processes these perceptions into mental images and makes them available to the intellect. For Aristotle, imagination is different from both perception and thought, and does not occur without perception or judgment without it, and distinguishes humans from all other beasts. Imagination is a type of movement that is responsible for our affections. For Averroes, followed by Aquinas, the imaginative movement prepares and is necessary to the intellectual activity. Dante follows this same principle, as in his commentary on Amor, nella mente, ragiona in Convivio 3, where he maintains that our intellect can only operate on the images it draws from our fantasia. Both Averroes and Aquinas, moreover, identify the passive intellect, that is the one that dies with the body, with the imaginative cogitative faculty. Dante too here defines fantasia as a virtù organica. No surprise, therefore, if being alive, Dante can receive such phantasmatic images. This, however, should be impossible for the soul of the wrathful, as it would presuppose that the organic part of the sensitive soul responsible for the storing and combination of images, possibly sense memory, must still be operative in them, even in their interim disembodied state. Dante thus differs from the position of those like Thomas, who maintain that cognition in the separated souls happens without the mediation of images. In Purgatorio, on the contrary, souls still know like embodied humans, neither through divine infusion, as for Thomas, nor like angels, as for Bonaventure. That's why, I believe, human memory and voice are at the center of Dante's encounters with both Casella and Forese. Memory and language are what distinguish men from the angels, as we learn from Paradiso and the Vulgare Eloquentia, respectively. In Dante's poetic vision, these key anthropological traits survive the body-soul separation and continue to inform the way purgatorial souls learn and communicate. So here is the fascinating paradox. In Dante's Purgatorio, souls grow spiritually by learning through sense experience, the most inferior and imperfect means of knowing, as Dante himself maintains in Convivio 2. Spiritual reformation, therefore, comes through the same perceptions and cognitive means by which we come to know confusamente un ben, all that is good in this life, and can lead us either to God or astray, as Virgil explains in his lecture about love as the organizing principle of Purgatorio. In Purgatorio 16, the canto before, Marco Lombardo explains that the role of religious and political authorities and laws is to turn the anima semplicetta che s'annulla away from obsessive attention to some particular pleasure that represents destruction. Cato's rebuke in Ante-Purgatory, as well as Beatrice's in Eden, both exemplify the necessity of these external correctives in the person's journey to God. The key role of this interpersonal and political support brings us to the most important aspect of aerial corporeality in Purgatory, in my opinion. In Purgatorio 25, rather than answering the question of how souls grow thinner, Statius' Aristotelian embryology explains how soul can appear thinner and share their internal affections with others. The aerial body provides for human empathy in Purgatory. Quindi parliamo e quindi ridiamo noi, quindi facciamo le lacrime e sospiri, che per lo monte aver sentiti puoi. Secondo che ci affliggono i desiri e gli altri affetti, l'ombra si figura. Dante explains that the body is necessary to make possible a movement from the inside to the outside rather than the other way around. His focus is not so much on how souls can sense physical pain, but how they can feel it and express their internal life. Souls grow thinner because they are afflicted by desires, not by the absence of material food. Their weight loss can figure through the image created by the aerial body. It's a figura of their desiri. It's an internal affliction that souls experience in Purgatory, and their aerial body makes it possible because, according to Aristotelian and scholastic psychology, the body is necessary for the soul to both have and express desires and affects. Souls have an aerial body so they can have an aspect and a voice, not only for manifesting themselves to the pilgrim, as Patrick Gardner argues in his excellent unpublished dissertation, but to make empathy and therefore community possible among them. The survival of sense memory in Purgatorio also depends on the invention of the aerial body and fulfills the primary communitarian and empathic function. Dante responds to Aristotle, Averroes, and Aquinas with a suitable theory that molds together scholastic, Augustinian, and patristic ideas. Soul can have sensitive and affective memories of their past life because their internal senses can operate, because the soul carries them with itself, as he tells us, but also by means of the soul's informing of a vicarious body, completed with organs. It's a helomorphic solution to a helomorphic problem. It's a philosophically imperfect solution, though, as the mystery of how the human soul should inform air rather than suitably prepared matter remains unaddressed. Rather, Dante creates a doctrinal tangle while fashioning a literary tour de force, to use Baranski's expression in defining Ante-Purgatory. What's most remarkable about Dante's commitment to the survival of sensitive memory, however, is that, like embodied sensation and manifestation, its primary function is recreating the affective and political community in Purgatory. The way Dante raises the question of memory through his meetings with his friends foregrounds its key affective and relational function. The ability to conserve affective memories of one's past life and relations is key to the recovery and transformation of human relationships. The recreation of empathy and charitable relationships made possible by the aerial body is as key to his reformation or digestion of impersonal memory in Purgatory as it is to the purging of individual sins. I think that the example of the envious is especially revealing as it shows the key role of the aerial body in this process. When Dante enters the second terrace, where envy is punished, he sees that these souls have been blinded, and they support each other by leaning against one another. Di vil cilicio mi parean coperti, e l'un sofferia l'altro con la spalla, e tutti dalla ripa eran sofferti. E come agli orbi non approda il sole, così all'ombre quivi ond'io parlo ora, luce del ciel di sé l'argil non vole, che è a tutti un fil di ferro i cigli fora, e cusce sì, come a sparvier selvaggio si fa, però che queto non dimora. This passage, I believe, should clarify for anyone that as marvelous as it looks, souls in Dante's Purgatorio know and interact with the world around them through their senses. These souls are literally blind and have to rely entirely on touch and hearing. Since their eyes were the windows by which the object of jealousy entered their mind, now they are punished by forced blindness. As their jealousy separated them from their fellow citizens and made them wish to destroy their community, now they must recover their dependence on it by physically supporting each other. It's worth remembering that according to Aristotle's Politics, the reason humans are by nature political is their need for others to fulfill all their different needs and their desire to provide for them. The main speaker of this canto confirms the political nuance, the Sienese Sapia. When Dante asks if any Italian is among these souls, she gives this telling reply: "O frate mio, ciascuna è cittadina d'una vera città, ma tu vuoi dire che vivesse in Italia peregrina." This answer is followed by her identification first and foremost as a citizen of Siena. Io fui senese, her earthly city. This is a telling effect of purgatorial education, I believe. As we learn her story, we discover that she had been so jealous that she not only wished for his fellow citizens to lose the battle against Florentine Guelphs at Colle Valdelsa in 1269, but rejoiced at their disastrous defeat, even to the point of challenging God. In Purgatory, instead, Sapia identifies as a citizen of both Siena and heaven, remarking how earthly ties with one's political community remain relevant in Dante's Purgatorio. It is thanks to one of her fellow citizens, the holy man Pier Pettinaio, that Sapia is already on the terrace of envy, even though she repented on her deathbed. Natural and eschatological communities can never be neatly separated from Purgatorio's perspective. In Sapia's story, we might surmise that being citizens on earth not only supports us in this life, but also on our path to becoming citizens of the heavenly one. The same idea comes from another Sienese 2 cantos earlier, Provenzal Salvani, the leader who died in the Battle of Colle Valdelsa, to Sapia's then great satisfaction, although he was her nephew. He is punished among the proud, and his pride played out in the political sphere as he wanted to become the city's tyrant. Yet he finds himself on the terrace of pride rather than in Ante-Purgatory among the late repentant, because while still alive, he did one charitable act toward a fellow citizen. One charitable civil action affected his time in Purgatory. Even though pride and jealousy divided Provenzal and Sapia, in Purgatory they remain members of a new community that doesn't simply transcend their earthly one, but mends it. As Dante's representation of the envious shows, having an aerial body that can touch and feel each other and can figurare the soul's affections on the outside is the essential means for this healing process through empathy. This allows for Purgatorio to be a collective journey and for the restoration of political community. Perhaps the civil and communitarian function of the aerial body is hinted at by Virgil and Sordello's embrace, which defies the failed ones between Dante and Casella first and Stazio and Virgil's then. Souls seem able to touch each other when these actions symbolizes social support, with a particular emphasis on political community, as in the case of the 2 poets from Mantua in the political 6th canto. It's certainly designed to allow for charitable support, as demonstrated not only by the envious, but also by Virgil's ability to come to Dante's help on several occasions, including Purgatorio 16. These marvelous bodies can lean on each other and thereby restore the social bonds their vices have contributed to destroying. As Dante's representation of envy shows, without a body, there will be no memory, no empathy, and no providing for others. Instead, every soul's journey of salvation or damnation is a social process involving both personal and collective history. On the terrace of envy, we also discovered that in their capacity to make soul visible, the aerial bodies are key to the sustaining of another community, the Ecclesia in Via, which binds souls in purgatory and on earth as they both progress to God. Prayer, as we know, is the primary medium by which the two sides of this community can help each other move forward. But prayers must be rekindled through affective memory, which, as we have seen, relies on images that make present to the mind something or someone that is presently absent. Memory's capacity to rekindle affection, and thus prayer, is encapsulated by Dante in his famous simile of the tombe terragne, to which he compares the bas-reliefs representing example of punished pride. Just before entering the Terrace of Envy, the pilgrim sees this program of visual example carved on the ground and compares it to earthly tomb. Come perché di lor memoria sia, sovra i sepolti le tombe terragne, portan segnato quel ch'egli eran pria, onde lì molte volte si ripiagne per la puntura della rimembranza che solo ai pii dà delle calcagne. The link between image and memory is explicit here. A person's physical appearance is necessary for remembrance, and remembrance is necessary for prayer, regret, and repentance that can mend the broken histories of our earthly relationships. This also sheds important light on one of the key functions of the aerial body. The concept of ombra that Dante uses to identify the disembodied soul is a synonym of figura. Moving from pride to envy, Dante uses the terms ombre and segni, and again ombre and tratti to refer to the bas-reliefs, and then again ombre to identify the souls of the envious, which are covered in gray mantle and look like the rock of the mountain, de facto associating visual images and shadows. Like the images on earthly tombs, Dante's souls are living images, of dead people, and are meant to spark memory, arouse affection, and move readers to compassion, as Dante is moved to tears as seeing the punishment of the envious. I think no man now walks upon the earth who is so hard that he would not have been pierced by compassion for what I saw next. Compassion is the key word here. The aerial bodies are images that make empathy and thus compassion possible. So, to conclude, if the lasting power of sense cognition, imagination, and memory are Dante's most original contribution to the late medieval debate about the separated soul's existence and cognition, I should end by noting that one of the main goals of purgatory, as Dante imagines it, is actually for souls to get rid of this mode of knowing. To appreciate this fact, we need to return to the point from which we have started our exploration. That moment when Cato storms the scene and chases the distracted souls away. He approaches them and exhorts them to strip of the scoglio that doesn't let God be manifest to them. Thanks to Lino Pertile's studies, we have traced the term scoglio to biblical and patristic treatment of original sin. Cato's invitation would be then generically to cast away the old man, the one who knows through the flesh rather than the spirit. But what precisely this process entails is not entirely clear. Let me propose that Cato's invitation identifies the purgatorial process of purification as the casting away of fantasia, knowledge through phantasmata, which, as we have seen, is the way disembodied souls still know and exist in purgatory. This is the limited and deceiving way we know and think about the world in this life. It is not, however, how intellectual knowledge of God can occur. As Dante explains precisely in his commentary on Amor, nella mente, ragiona, our bodily fantasia is the reason why in this life we cannot hope to know the separated substances, that is, God and the angels. Although for Dante the purgatorial souls still know and remember through the organic power of fantasia, they need to progress from sense cognition to pure intellectual speculation in heaven, where, like angel, disembodied souls receive intellectual species directly from God without mediation of imagination. To appreciate how Cato's scoglio might refer to the shedding of fantasia, that purgatorial souls need to undergo. Let me read this passage from Hugo of St. Victor's De Unione Corporis et Spiritus. Now, the rational substance is a bodily light. Imagination, insofar as it is the image of a body, is a shadow. But if reason clings to it with delight, imagination becomes for it like a skin, so that it cannot be torn away without pain, because it had adhered to it with love. Hence, it is that souls, even when stripped of their bodies, can still be held by bodily passions, because they have not yet been cleansed from the corruption of bodily affections. For the soul itself, insofar as it is affected by delight in the body, carries with it, as it were, a certain corporeality, and is deformed by the same bodily phantasms of the imagination. And since these are deeply imprinted, it does not cast them off even when it is freed from the body. In Hugues' words, bodily imagination is similar to the shadow projected by Dante's body, and like the disembodied ombre he encounters in the Ante-Purgatory, which retain a certain corporeality. They both represent the lingering of embodied existence and knowledge through phantasmata. Clinging to this type of knowledge with love, like Casella's unchanged love for Dante, is like having a skin that has to be torn away with much pain for the souls, so that they can finally see God directly by means of his luce intellettual piena d'amore alone. Hence, the souls cease to be ombre in Paradiso and become one with that light. Dante too, although still embodied, will undergo the same process until the moment when, contemplating God, his fantasia will finally end, at the point where the poem ends, all'alta fantasia qui manco possa. But this is not the end of the story. As Dante suggests when talking about the resurrection of the body in Paradiso 14, and when indicating by means of Beatrice that in the Empyrean he will see the blessed in the aspetto they'll have on Judgment Day. Body and imagination will still hold a place in the final contemplation of God, but here the poem ends, leaving this a mystery a cui esperienza grazia serva. In our age of AI and technological alienation, of fractured political communities and broken social bonds, Dante's vision offers us something to reckon with. The claim that we are fundamentally social beings, whose salvation, however we understand that term, is inextricably bound up with the salvation of others, and that our organic intelligence is primarily an embodied and social one. Let me conclude with a personal remark. It is only fitting that I should talk about the key relevance of memory here, where for so many years I have had the opportunity to learn from and share with a vibrant and intellectual and affective community. As I keep digesting my own memories, I find that this community continues to nourish and encourage me today. And for this, I can only thank you and can never thank you enough. Grazie.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for those kind words at the end as well. Comments, questions, debate, discussion? Who wants to start? He got that right up front. He asked the first question.
Go ahead.
You always raise the eye.
An invitation, well, first of all, thank you. It was great. Invitation perhaps to say a little more, sort of picking up on where you're ending on the Paradiso. In terms of, you were referring to the resurrection and to how even in the Paradiso, the body is key. You referred to Paradiso 14 and the reflection of the resurrection there. There is there in Paradiso 14 the reference to the desire that the blessed have to have their bodies again for that, for reconnecting, per le mamme e padri, gli altri che for cari, their mummies and fathers and dear ones. Is there, how would you relate that in a little more detail to what begins with Casella and that sort of the particularity of human seems to be very important right there when Dante speaks of the resurrection. You hinted at that.
Yes.
Can you say a little more about it?
I wrote about that, a very long and boring article that I'm not sure is entirely correct at this point. But I'm not sure, but it seems to me that Dante never really gives up on the body. He couldn't, you know, for poetic reason, but I think also because of the kind of social and political needs that drive his poetic commitment in the poem. The poem is as much about reconstructing, you know, his fractured world or our fractured world as much as it is about the vision of God. So there is that. But then I wonder, I thought, when I wrote about it, I thought he was kind of differently from Thomas, saying, you know, you can't really see God until you are one in spirit and body. And then I understood better that for Thomas is the same. And I also not entirely sure how to interpret that happiness that they have for their moms and dads. In my reading, the body is essential because, well, what Dante says is that we will make perfect the human person, right? And because of that, God, you know, will his love for the perfection of the creatures will increase, and so the grace, and from the grace, the vision. Okay, so it doesn't seem like the body adds necessarily, if not to the perfection, and it's God who does the rest. But then when Dante talks about the desio of corpi morti and the love for fathers and mothers, as I suggested in that piece, I think there is a reference to the same. Paolo Nasti says that it follows the order of charity, which is also what Thomas says in the Summa, and I think there is that. But it's interesting that King Solomon is the one who's talking there, and he is celebrated for his political prudence. And as often I try to suggest that in the Commedia, the community of the church and the community of the saved and the natural community, which is made of blood ties and political ties, tend to overlap a lot. I know we disagree on that a bit. You remember we had an exchange about that, and some theologian says, well, it doesn't matter if you're citizens in heaven as much as it matters as you are on earth. But I do think that for Dante that's not the case, and I do think that when he talks about the resurrected body, once again, he's putting forth the idea that it's with our bodies that we not only love others, but we provide for others, and that's part of our natural desire. And so that has to be fulfilled. We don't want to only enjoy God, we also want to love others, provide for others. And so I think that's, in my reading, that overlaps. But it's a very difficult passage, so I'm not sure that it's so correct. I do think that, as I tried to suggest, it very much applies to Purgatory. Like Purgatory, it's like the overlapping between the political and the ecclesial community is really strong. I think Ante-Purgatory is a great example because you have all this emphasis on the body and soul relationship, and then then there is Sordello, and everything shifts into politics, right? And that's not only to be mourned, as we know, right? But it's to be redeemed immediately with the envies. So, and just to conclude that, I think is really, to me, it's fascinating that just this to see the body is so important. Why does Dante has to see the aspetto of the blessed as they will look on Judgment Day, to see God? Why? And then he loses his fantasia. But he still has to see that aspetto. It's fascinating.
You want to disagree? I'm being provocative, but you know, I feel like you're missing a piece, though, when you talk about the political community of Siena in the Purgatorio. There's a big space between that and real politics, and you know, I feel like there's a need for more articulation between the poetic community that is being represented in the poem and how is that getting translated into what you're calling a political anthropology? I mean, a political anthropology, okay, it's very idealized political anthropology, the representation of Siena in Purgatorio 13 and 14, which is, it's a reinvention. It's not the reality, except in the vision of the artist who has recomposed and rewritten, so to speak, the alienation of the real historical
Yeah.
community that is also being represented in the poem. So, okay, Florese, same thing. You get, although Florese is kind of, you know, with the Donati, with Course of Donati, I mean, it's not just straightforward there, the idealization of the political community, you know, this almost sentimental memory of an idealized form. So it's just a general comment. I mean, you don't really need to respond to that. I don't know if others have a feeling that there's something, you know, because then when you jump to the Paradiso, just like that, I mean, that's a whole nother level of articulation and translation between a political vision and a metaphysical and a theological, and so, you know, it's just a caveat, a reservation about, you know, it's kind of hard to follow. Does it make any sense what I'm saying to you?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's also a way to read all those meetings just historically, right? The relationship that Dante has with Siena, the relationship that Dante has with the family of the Donati, and I think those are absolutely legitimate readings. And I think, as you are also showing with Ante-Purgatory in your work, there is this connection with his own autobiography as well, right? And there's a lot that I need to do still with this work. The only thing I want to point out, though, is that when I talk about political anthropology, Siena and envy is an example. But what is interesting to me is what is at the heart of Purgatorio, which is a reflection on how we know. And the reflection of how we know and we apprehend through images, imagination, is really the key to how we learn in life what is good and what is wrong and how we get to God, right? And I think that what I'm trying to show with this work is that Dante's emphasis on imagination and sensation and area, you know, the invention of the aerial body and all that has a key political implication that perhaps we haven't explored that much. And then I come to envy as a great example of that, because I think it's really interesting how there, where that theme is so powerful in its historical implication, the body, the aerial body plays such an interesting role. They are blind. There is this emphasis on the fact that Dante feels ashamed that he can see and he's not seen. They have to lean on each other, and they look like the bas reliefs. Right? I mean, what is he doing there? And I think that to me is what is interesting. I think that what Dante is arguing, and this becomes so, at least in Purgatorio, it's so powerful with Marco Lombardo, is that the political issue is linked to our anthropological, we are an anima semplicetta that knows nothing, start learning through the senses, got lost, and so you need the laws, and so you need the king, and so you need Cato. And so Beatrice comes and says, why did you keep looking, you know, at my dead body? So that's what I'm interested in, the fact that for Dante, the political issue, at least in Purgatorio, is discussed with such emphasis on how we are constituted as body and soul. So that's what I wanted to emphasize with my work. But
Well, just, you know, this is a research seminar, so we can just
Yeah, yeah.
it out. I mean, another suggestion, or another
Yeah.
piece that I feel would be helpful to add is how this is intersecting with the poetics.
yes,
course.
Which is, you know, you're not dealing with that at all. It struck me, and there's so many opportunities to do that. And,
I know.
You know, l'ombra si figura, you know, what is figurare? Figurare is really powerful.
Of course.
So there's like this kind of intersection between the poetic making of the body, you know, I mean, I just feel like that may well eventually, you know, become an important
Yeah,
theme
absolutely.
in this, because it'll connect. I mean, we haven't really understood how Purgatorio 25 is feeding into Dante's poetics. There's been a lot of
Yeah.
talk about that, but I don't feel like it's exactly.
Well,
perfect.
because it has been discussed so much, I was trying to.
No, I appreciate it.
But you know, I think what has been said there, it's very important. I just hinted at that when I said that at some point I said that embodiment is key to both his poetics, which is so centered on sense knowledge and imagination. And I think that, you know, even Agamben has great pages on that. And I think it's hard to, Freccero has said, you know, very important things. Zig in his latest works on Purgatorio 25. I do agree. It's hard for me to figure out how to put everything together, because you go from the figurare of the body to the figurare of the paradiso, right? I mean, it's just,
Right.
but I think, you know, what I hope is not overimposing on the text, but it's perhaps teasing out something that is less familiar to us. It's what might be the political dimension of
Right.
that.
No. Questions, comments?
If
Yeah,
I
Laura.
may, so since you have just closed with talking about political theory, basically, and political anthropology, so I was struck that you have not mentioned the actual political theories
Yeah.
and political anthropology. So the change in the late 13th century with the from Ciceronian to
To
Aristotelian
yeah.
and mechanics, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe you didn't put it in for us, so if you could say more about that if you're going into that direction.
Yeah.
And instead, just continuing thinking as Cato was doing, if you're thinking of the relationship within the body and soul, like a human being is body and soul. So I think
Yeah.
I had a hard time following what's the problem with that. Like, how can it be just soul? Just to put it easy for the students that are here.
Yeah.
So if you can say more about that, so since we have groups, my students, so
Yeah.
they're not into the theology as you are.
Or the philosophy in this
Yeah,
case
of
more.
course.
But so the political theory is yet to come much in my work, honestly. I mean, this is a way longer piece, of course. I just extracted something, but even in the longer, I don't develop too much that yet. I do think that it's interesting, as you mentioned, the shift from the Ciceronian to the Aristotle ethics, and then eventually later on the rediscovery of the politics. I think it's interesting how the ethics and this is something I discuss, comes in, for instance, in commentaries by theologians like Thomas, as an interpretation of charity, not just as a theological virtue, but as a natural, rational tendency of the person. Albert the Great, for instance, commenting on Matthew 25, when there's that eschatological image of the shepherd dividing goats, and then there is the basically what decides if you go to heaven or not is whether you did the corporal work of mercy. So if you took care of your brother's bodies, basically, you save your soul, which is a great, again, a very interesting, and that's a passage I'm interested in perhaps other chapters of this work. Albert says that the desire to provide for the needs of other people is a desire of
of the rational animal to, in particular of the human person. So it technically is not, in that case, a gift, a theological virtue. So I'm interested in that, and I think it's interesting how that plays into Dante's reflection, also in Paradiso 14. Now, for the second part of your question, which was,
If you can say more.
yes,
how you
yes.
deal
So
with that.
I do recommend that there are works that are very helpful. One of them is Gragnolati's of Still, Experiencing the Afterlife. But the crucial shift around a little bit before Dante's time has been from an eschatological emphasis on when we all will resurrect, right? Body and soul, as you say, humans are body and soul, to the interim time. So there was the increasingly both theologians and also representations and popular religiosity, including the idea of purgatory, starting and purgatory is really close to that development, started to focus on the existence of the soul as a separated thing. So can the soul, and this became the huge theological debate that resolved after Dante's death, which was about the beatific vision, whether these souls can actually enjoy God as separated or they need a body. And the final result was they can, even without a body. And so that was a major anthropological shift, because then are we body and soul, or are we just, soul? And so Aquinas has been accused of basically putting too much emphasis on the soul because he says it's the form of the body. But I think that's not correct. But anyway, thank you for bringing that up, because as you say, it's probably a context that is helpful to have. Yeah, it's hard to select. But yeah, that's a great point. So Dante is dealing with this major anthropological shift, and Purgatory, which is, as we know, Dante's, allowed Dante's the greatest creative freedom, because it was just recently become a doctrine, is really an emphasis on the interim state. So that's why I think it's so interesting that Dante represents souls that are actually act like humans. And again, Albert the Great says there are some philosophers who says that souls can actually sense and perceive, and that's ridiculous. So what Dante is doing is technically ridiculous for this kind of, but he really wants to go into the detail of that, and I think that's important.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for this gateway into a very fascinating debate. I wanted you to expand a bit more on the term sciolta, when it says about the soul that's sciolta. Because here you're quoting, I guess it's the Mandarin translation where it says it's freed. So I was wondering about the meaning in the specific passage of the word says sciolta.
Do you have anything in mind? Because why are you raising that term in
Because
particular?
I guess it kind of points out toward a certain bond. And this choice of freed from something, it's kind of a negative connotation. I was free from something.
And that negative connotation is in the Convivio too. I mean, Dante talks about the carcere del corpo. So again, it's a very interesting tension that is there, honestly. As well as in Purgatorio 25, Dante says that as soon as the soul is divided from the body, memory, will, memory, intellect, and will become stronger, which seems to be counter to his commitment to the human person as a composite of body and soul. I don't know, honestly. I don't have an answer, because that tension is there. It seems to me that the poem, again, there's the tension that other people have discussed too. I will refer again to Gragnolati or Dante and the Human Body, because there are great pages there. Personally, I do think that Dante moves between these two poles that one finds also in the philosophical debate of the time, which was between a more theological idea of the souls as kind of having all these powers within it, that is Augustinian, and the more kind of philosophical, natural philosophical needs of Aristotelian views. For instance, it's obvious to everybody that getting old, you don't remember things as well, right? And so, and Aristotle talks of that. So there are evidence in our experience that memory is not something that is detached from the body. And so he kind of moves between these two poles, it seems to me. But what is most remarkable, again, when you get to Paradiso, is that there is a commitment there, I think, to the body and to, again, perhaps just the aspetto of that body. And so it seems to me that the movement in Dante's reflection about the unity of soul and body tends towards the composite. That's at least my opinion. But it's a tension that it's clearly there. So,
I think Rebecca had, and then Beatrice.
Thank you so much. I guess I had a question on the poetic side too, because of course the first thing that came to mind was like, of course he needed them to remember, just because it's a story, it's a fiction. But I got curious towards the end when you said that like he's correcting the mode of knowledge of Casella, and I couldn't help but think about the rivers. So the rivers are in Eden, and that part that he adds that is linked to memory. So I was wondering if you thought about that.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. And I definitely, when it will come out, you know, Eleonora Bonacor's book on memory in Dante will be definitely the place to go to. But I had a conversation with Eleonora about that because obviously the text there seems to suggest that the souls will forget their sins. And that's at least what Eleonora thinks, but I don't think that's the case. And for several theologians, that will also not be the case, because if you forget your sins, how can you remember your redemption, right? So memory in Purgatory, it's key for the whole process, because you have to go through your sins and eventually move and go through the river. And that's why I think it's so fascinating to put together those two meetings between Dante and Casella and Dante and Forese. I think we have looked at them from many different perspectives, but I don't think we have compared how differently they act in relation to their memory. And I find fascinating that connection between the whole issue of digestion and Augustine's idea of memory as the belly of the mind, as something that digests. And digestion for Dante is a verb that implies the preparation of something, right? In Convivio, he talks of digestion of the matter as preparation of matter to receive its form, right? And so I think that memory has this key function in Purgatory, but not to erase, as Lete will seem to suggest. Again, that is a question of how you read what Dante says in those cantos. For Inglese, for instance, it's less obvious that he's saying that the sins will be forgotten. That's not what for instance, he thinks, and also I don't believe that's the point. And I think that Augustine is a key model in Purgatory. There is a very good essay by Kevin Grove, I think, on that in a volume that Vittorio has curated. And it seems to be, and Augustine has this great, if you look at Grove's book on Augustine on memory, I think it's interesting how he emphasizes the kind of ecclesial development of memory in Augustine. And I think that's key to Purgatory. I think that's it, because in Sapia, the other interesting thing is that that not only they can remember their sins, they have to. That's part of what is so important for them. And that's something that it's in Augustine, and it's also connected to the resurrection, which is a key image that goes in those, that is present in the first cantos of Purgatory. I'll say more about that tomorrow, but that's, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about these kind of fault lines between the philosophical theological discussion and the poetic depiction. So you said, you know, with the aerial body, Dante's posing these theological questions but not resolving them. So I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about what you think are particular fault lines in the poem where we see this this kind of failure of one discourse and the taking over of the other. or the blending of the two. And I have a second.
Wait, what is the second though?
So you said he poses these theological discourses, but he doesn't resolve them. So these moments where it's not being resolved, perhaps this takes us back to the discussion of what the fictional aspect, the poetic aspect of the text is doing.
Yeah.
And then I had a second question, which was just about how you feel your study is positioned in the field. So you mentioned Granulati's work, but I'm also thinking about Heather Webb's book on Dante's persons,
Yes.
which also discusses
Yes.
some similar topics about personhood,
Yes.
community, and also the body as well.
Yes.
So those were my two
Yes. Thank you very much.
inquiries.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, well, I was thinking, I mean, I don't know if we should call them failures, or I was suggesting that the explanation in Purgatorio 25 is you know, it's actually a fitting answer, but it has some problems. It's not a perfect philosophical solution because according to the kind of helomorphic conception that it follows, the form of the human body shouldn't create a body made of air. It should make, you know, and again, Dante talks about that in Convivio. I just mentioned that there is a matter that is specifically prepared for a form. So that's technically, if you're coming to that to that discussion from that perspective, is an issue. This said, what I think is that, and that's why I was emphasizing that, in a sense, Forese answers the question already. Because Forese tells that basically they are growing thinner because for virtù del celeste, through the smell, that's what's happening. So Statius' answer is really about how they can project a body that looks that way, and what's the connection between that body and their affliction, basically. So it's a very specific answer. And so if you look at that, what I think is that Dante, and here I had arguments with other people, not friendly arguments, but like, I'm not sure that Dante is so interested in the key scholastic question of the time, which was, how do these souls suffer from a material fire? That was the question of the time, all right? Because in the Bible, it's clear that they do that, but then if they are not made of a body, how do they actually suffer from fire? There were all sorts of explanations for that. Some people just said, look, this is not something we can answer philosophically, okay? But some did try, including Thomas, okay? I don't think that's what Dante cares about. And that's what, for instance, Purgatorio 25 has been connected to that kind of question. So what I was trying to suggest is that Dante often raises the philosophical question, as with memory. So he's aware of that. And to me, it seems a very funny move, the one with Casella. Oh, I love you like I love you in my body. And of course, I can sing and remember. But that's a big deal. Does he sing? And of course, you know, souls in Inferno could do that. So why is he asking this question now? But because Purgatorio is about the human person. I mean, if there's something that, about among many other things, but like a core focus of Purgatorio is on the human person. To me, that's what is most fascinating. So to go to the second question, I think that's what I come to, and I'm really close to Webb's work in that sense. I try to come in from maybe a slightly different sources, bring them to the table, but it's the same idea. I totally agree with that, as well as gesture has a key role. I try to complement some of the poetic, like the more, I mean, it's from a poetic perspective, the short answer is also, he couldn't write a poem. You know, if these bodies didn't act like that, you know, you just don't have a poem. But then there's also all the implications that we were mentioning within the poetics of the Dolce Stil Novo, its connection to images and the phantasms, right? Those are part of the poetics, not just of Dante, but Cavalcante. So I feel that has been explored. There is more to say, but what I'm trying to come in from is these different perspectives on the body, the problem of the body and soul debate at the time, and its political implications specifically. By political, I mean classical politics. So the question of, you know, why humans are political beings.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question.
Here.
Yes, hi.
I have just a very open-ended question
Yeah.
about Dante's construction and representation of these
Yeah.
aerial bodies, that it seems to me that one major difference between aerial bodies and real bodies that Dante draws attention to in Purgatorio 3 is that the aerial bodies are transparent to light, and that
Yes.
light could shine through
Yes.
them without casting a shadow.
Yes.
And I wonder if you've reflected on this diaphanous character of these bodies, and how maybe Dante treats that character throughout the Purgatorio. The reason I'm asking that is because I've noticed this for the first time through reading your quotes here, that it seems that in the 13th canto, when Dante comes across the envious and their eyes are sewn shut, I wonder if you might agree with this deduction, but it seems that if these bodies are actually transparent, the souls with their eyes shut,
Yeah.
they should actually still be able to receive the
The light.
sensible
Yeah.
species of light, but
Yeah.
then they're actually prevented in this
Yeah.
case from seeing, even though
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with their eyes. The lids
Yeah.
are just covering them.
Yeah.
So it seems that Dante seems to have an uneven treatment of
Yes.
this character. I don't know
Well,
if
the
you've
same
reflected
problem
on
is
this.
with the aerial body's ability to touch or not, right? I was just suggesting that there is an interesting pattern in the way souls seem to be able to touch each other if there is kind of a either political connection, Sordello and Virgilio, right? Whereas Statius and Virgil can't. Again, this might be, just some commentators just say like Castelnuovo is very mean about that, right? Dante just doesn't get it right. He's not consistent here, or he's not thinking things through. I do think that my answer to this kind of question is Dante is not as interested in being always philosophically consistent as he is interested in the symbolic meaning of some aspects of corporeality. And so in the case of the envious, and I don't know if you're familiar with Patrick Gardner's dissertation, which I referenced, that is a very detailed discussion of these kind of issues. For instance, for him, the souls do not see, do not sense, and when they talk about seeing, it's really Dante seeing them that it's being emphasized. I think he gets into a bit of a tangle there. I don't think he's getting it right. But there are issues that are there. The ones that you were mentioning is one. And it seems to me that, again, the whole question, and that's why I like the hue of St. Victor's quotation at the end, the whole thing about the shadow, Dante's shadow, and these shadows has to do with the symbolic significance of reason as light, imagination as shadow, imagination as being some form of corporeality, like the way we envision things, in a sense, is a corporeality within our mind. So I think that it's more symbolic, in my opinion. And I'm sure this is not a satisfactory answer, but I don't always find that everything is consistent when Dante discusses corporeality. But thank you for noticing that.
Thank you, Filippo. And
Thank you, guys. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being patient.
you worked hard.
What?
You worked hard. You got a lot of discussion.
Good.
Go fast on your feet.
Well, you don't usually get